Caroline, you've spoken a bit about why and figuring out why we do what we do in the work of children and youth ministries. I'm intrigued by that. And I'm also intrigued by something you said, which was that the why is the same across all ages, both children and youth, and probably even adults too. Can you speak to how a minister or a committee can hone in on what their why actually is?
Yeah, I think finding the why is a process in and of itself. And so I encourage folks to take time, and that the why maybe is going to change. The why in a particular season for a ministry or a church might evolve, and they might want to nuance it or come back to and revisit it. But I think in terms of finding it, it's going to be conversation. Getting those stakeholders, getting people who love kids and who want to make space and place for them in your church together, and to start wondering aloud together, go apart, maybe do individual work and then bring it back. What do we want our kids to know to be true about themselves and this place and their relationship to God? We want them to know, I'm sure, a lot of things. And so winnowing that down to kind of an essential why together, and that it's going to be informed by multiple perspectives. But you want it to be broad enough that it can hold lots of things, and then also specific enough that you can point to it and say, are we doing that? Is that part of the ministry we're operating towards and doing? Because then you can say, this isn't that ministry. This was a really great thing, and it maybe fits another group's vision of who they are, but that's not our why. It'll be a good barometer of what you're doing. You'll also be able to then talk to young people. Is this resonating? Are we doing this together? Does this sound like something you want to be a part of? I think we don't ever want to take the young people out of the equation totally. We can come up with the greatest why for them, but if it's not resonating, if it's not feeling authentic to them, it's probably not your organization's why. I think you had another built-in piece of that question that I want to make sure I'm going back to.
Yeah, no, just making sure committees and ministers know how to hone in on what their why actually is.
Yeah, and so I think getting it out and trying it out and lifting it up and saying, does this sound right? Putting a few phrases together and trying it with the actual practice of that ministry. And so it's going to be, I think, conversation and nuance to say, okay, maybe we're pulling from part of the church's vision statement, but it's not just a replication of that, because we want it focused on young people, on the formation of children and youth. Or maybe it's exactly like the vision for all of us in our church, because we think those two things aren't unrelated. I could argue it either way, but I think each context is going to have to name for themselves and then do that work. Truly get it on paper, come up with some phrases, bounce them off each other. How can they be combined? How can they be shortened? What other words might get to what you want to do? But I think there's going to be some verbs involved. I think there's going to be some sense of true ministry and vision from what your organization does and how you want your young people to feel when they're there and know to be true when they leave. Both when they leave on a Tuesday and when they leave you when they're 18, when they're 25, when they're 50. But it's probably going to be true for a 4-year-old and a 14-year-old. It's not an in process. It's not, this will be true when they know this or when they have done this, but it's just true because it's about young people and how you are engaging them and loving them and coming alongside them.
Yeah, and it strikes me that the vision work is never simple, but also might involve some winnowing, right? There are probably a number of things and a number of traditions that have fallen into place for whatever reason over the years that might not fit the new why that a committee or minister has developed. So there's a little bit of pruning that might need to be done.
Yeah, and that can be hard work, because you need to kind of separate from the feeling of like, oh, that's no longer good, or it wasn't good then. If it served you well for a long time for whatever reason, but we know that the church is changing. We know that our understanding of what ministry to young people is changing. And especially if you are trying to bring children's and youth together, maybe for the first time intentionally in your ministries or for the first time in recent history, then the vision statement is probably going to change. It needs to look different if we're trying to do this intentionally in new ways. And so I commend that work. I know that there's a lot in there, but I think hold it lightly, be curious, kind of push back and come back together and, do spend the time to do the work to get to a why, and know that it might change. But hold up a draft and say, I think this is where we are right now. Does this feel authentic to us?